Hi, I'm back again in the green room. Uh, Experimented with some lighting. It's never going to be really great in here except during the daytime. But I was too slack to transport my rig downstairs again, and I trying to wind down and work out all this caffeine that's coursing through my bloodstream, so I can sleep and awaken early to work for the man. Um, but just want to throw a few thoughts out there. There's one thing that I haven't talked about in any of my videos yet, really, that I know of, that I remember. Um, and that is music. Music is like, one of the driving forces of my existence. It has been for a long time. I'm pretty obsessed with it. Gone through phases back and forth between music being my favorite artistic medium and visual art, which includes like obviously fine art, comics, etc., and film. Those three kind of were always vying for the top slot. Film has kind of come up out on top for the most part the last several years, um, but I love the others. With music, um, I guess I listen to such a wide variety of things. I know that sounds like cliched, like I'm eclectic, but I don't know. I wouldn't call myself eclectic in that sense, and I'm not a dilettante either. I'm pretty deep when I start exploring these various genres and artists. So, what kind of stuff do I like? There are four or five kind of genres or subgenres that I tend to go back to a lot recently, like in the last 1 to 2 years, that kind of have different effects on me, help my temperament, help my mood, fit my mood. Um, they're all a little odd and they're mostly pretty different from each other. Uh, One would be black metal. I came into that kind of late. And I mean, I knew about mayhem and church burnings and Lords of Chaos and all that stuff. But I didn't get into the music too much of Mayhem. Later, I did begin getting into some of their later stuff that was a bit more progressive influenced. Took a trip to Providence, Rhode Island with my buddy, and we were listening to a couple of the Mayhem albums all the way through up there, in between Rainbow albums. But I like Mayhem, but they're not the finest example of black metal to me. To me, black metal has finally achieved its promise as a musical genre. And to me, if I can make a really bold statement, it's achieved the promise of heavy metal in general. Um, I was obsessed with metal in the 80s, growing up with it, and my favorite band was and still is Black Sabbath, um, in all its various incarnations. But you know, there's a lot of wanky, cheesy, just metal that I didn't like in the '80s that didn't appeal to me. I was more into the heavier, darker, more mystical kind of thing, with lyrics and sound. And so Sabbath appealed to me. Early Judas Priest, Blue Oyster Cult, early Iron Maiden, etc. Those are the kind of things that I responded to. Rainbow, Dio, things of that nature. Um, but then later I got into punk and hardcore music. But one of my gateway drugs to that was Motorhead because I started seeking heavier music, and so when I found Motorhead, I was like, wow, this is intense, man. That was 1980, the magic year, 1987. And I was a kid hanging out at a record store with JJ, who I've mentioned in my Flickr Street videos. And this guy, he slits open No Remorse on vinyl and says, "Hey, I'm going to play you some of this album. I'm so confident that you're going to love it and buy it that I'm slitting it open and I'm going to, you know, take the chance on you not buying it and me getting in trouble for opening the product. I think that guy's name was Bullock, something Bullock, Bullard, Bullock, something like that. Anyway, he was he was like a very charlatan kind of guy. That's hard to explain if you haven't lived here before, or rather if you're not a native to here. There are certain kinds of people in the subcultures and the scene, as they used to call it, who just they're very Charlotte. They're very Charlotte scene kind of people. You saw them when you were a little kid hanging out in clubs and record stores. You see them now hanging out at clubs and record stores. Well, maybe not with COVID going on. And when we're geriatric, we're gonna see each other hanging out in clubs and record stores. So in Charlotte, and the same kind of people recycled over and over. There's one reason I love the internet, because I like meeting different kinds of people from different cultures and different states, different countries, and if I could, different planets. But I'm getting there. And Charlotte is very kind of incestuous, and it's always has been in its music scene and its art scene. And to be real honest, it just most of the stuff that has come out of it since the 90s has not interested me. There was a time when the Charlotte music scene was a lot of creativity was going on, but several bands were beginning to break or on the very cusp of breaking. And I was in one of them for a little while, called Chiaroscuro. We weren't on the cusp of breaking, but we were on the path. Um, and we're talking like 1991, the year punk broke with Nirvana, Sonic Youth, Lollapalooza. So, the following year, we could have been doing pretty well. We could have ridden that wave. It didn't happen. Um, and then grunge took over, and then I don't know. But all the bands, it seemed to me in Charlotte, that were on that edge of taking it to the next level creatively and commercially at the same time, breaking out of just being a Charlotte band, uh, folded because of egos within the bands. That was a horrible thing, and the bands I were in, I was no exception to that. And I mean, I was one of the egos, but I didn't really have much to show for it. I was pretty insecure about my musical talents, but now I'm fine. I mean, I know that the stuff I write is good stuff. It's solid. Some of it was ahead of its time, and that brings us all the way full circle back to black metal. Is some of the stuff I was doing, the heavier stuff I was doing, abstract stuff I was doing at home with feedback and various other things. Some of it reminds me of, this subgenre of black metal. It's commonly called atmospheric black metal. There's some little prongs here and there, but there's like cosmic black metal, and on one extreme where you've got the science fiction element, which I love, and then on the other extreme you've got like depressive black metal, where you've gone totally morbid, totally personal, no fantasy stuff, just like basically how much you want to end it all. And there's great bands across this whole spectrum though, and that satisfy all these different moods. And there are some musical commonalities throughout all of it, and yet there's some groups that sound nothing remotely like they're of the same genre, but they are both rooted in that genre. So sometime I'll do a video on black metal. I'll do a little more research and pull what I have with, how it's evolved on a factual basis, and talk about my slant on it. I'm just kind of touching on it here now. Um, but I really love it. It's been an incredible experience. Like I said, to me, it fulfilled the promise of metal. Metal bands, they were boxed in by commercial restrictions, and a lot of them became more and more conventional as the 1990s happened and onward. I mean, and as they became less relevant commercially to the music scene, larger music scene, it seemed like they ran out of ideas instead of continuing to experiment like they had in the 1960s, late 1960s through like maybe the mid 1980s. They were, I don't know, it was disappointing. And so when I found Motorhead and then hardcore punk, and then of course I was also listening to other more melodic kinds of music at the time, and then I found prog rock, jazz, and onward down to reggae, etc. And it's kind of broke open from there. Industrial music and everything. I love all those genres. I don't love all groups of all those genres, and maybe not the groups that a lot of people do, but I'm kind of weird that way. Um, but so metal disappointed me, bored me, and seemed kind of lame. Then I had to kind of reclaim it. I kind of went full circle and like Graves and Clerks movies, taking it back, man, taking back the metal. So that's kind of what I've been doing in recent years. Is I'm not ashamed of being into metal anymore, and metal itself is becoming a little more respectable now than it was for a number of years because those cheesy elements. Well, some of them have become popular again through nostalgia for the '80s, but a lot of them that people like myself eschew um, are not what's rising to the fore. Even the kind of funk metal, groove metal, new metal stuff that dominated the commercially. Uh, that was to me that was further retrogression, not progression. It was nice to see genre bending a bit with funk and hip hop and some other elements, but I don't feel like the writing was strong in those groups, and usually, and this isn't something I'm a snob about, but usually not the playing wasn't to me. I mean, it was very precise, but that's just it. It was precise because it was very commercial. It was very compartmentalized, and black metal's nothing like that. I mean, it's completely underground, and uh, it's rising, but the thing about it is the music is important and the vibe, the feeling of it. Um, bands can just jam off a few ideas for a whole fucking album. You know, there's that looseness that's it's broken open that you haven't really seen in rock since like or metal, especially since like progressive rock or when Sabbath was starting to experiment and groups like that. King Crimson, who weren't metal, but they were very heavy many a times. Um, there's a lot of that spirit in what's happening now, and so I kind of call it progressive black metal. But that's kind of progressive has its own baggage, because of kind of wanky commercial progressive bands who definitely had their moments, but still like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Genesis, who actually was a great band when they were more prog. But once Peter Gabriel left, it just it was a different whole mindset to that, and it became all about from my point of view, it became all about them making money and more money and even more money, doing songs that are just interminably tedious. Uh, as I posted recently on Facebook, rock and roll ain't noise pollution, but Phil Collins sure as fuck is. And I do agree with that sentiment that I threw out there. His stuff is interminable. But he was a great drummer back in the day with Genesis and Brand X and some other stuff. So I respect him on that level, but not as a songwriter or vocalist or any of that kind of stuff. Lyricist, oy vey. But I'm not really even that into Peter Gabriel's solo stuff past the first handful of albums, the first two or three where he's got a really incredible band going on and doing some really wild stuff, and then Passion from the soundtrack for the Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese. Uh, so yeah, there's like three or four Peter Gabriel solo albums that I enjoy. Um, I haven't reacquired them. I used to have all of them, uh, but around the time he got to Peter Gabriel 3 and 4, around the time he got to Games Without Frontiers, which was a weird song. It was a commercial hit, but It was admittedly a very strange song. We all kind of made fun of it back then. The guys that I knew who were kind of into metal and rock were kind of, you know, thought it was a bit twee, so to speak. But it's actually pretty cool and idiosyncratic. And I had no clue who Kate Bush was back then, and I didn't know that they had been working together, and she was working on some of that material with him. And I really didn't know who Robert Fripp was back then either. So, I didn't know that. I believe Fripp played on the first Gabriel album, but solo album. But it was the core band was this band. I don't know if they ever had their own name. Like Bob Dylan had a band, and then they split off and just became the band, capital T, capital B. There was like a band that was like Prakash John and Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner, and I forget the other one or two guys' names, but they were like a rhythm guitar, lead guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, kind of for hire. I mean, they played on the live album Rock and Roll Animal by Lou Reed. They played on Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare, and they played on the first couple Peter Gabriel albums, and appeared other places too with those musicians and others. Um, Someone should write a book about them. But I always enjoyed their stuff. I always thought they were great. Dick Wagner's just an underrated guitar player, and I should put him on my pantheon of guitarists that I have up on Facebook, lead guitarists. Um, so anyway, uh, yeah, black metal. Yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of variety. And I believe, end of 2018, uh, I did my list, or it could have been the end of 2019. No, it was definitely the end of 2018. I was not together in the end of 2019. 2018, I did my top 25 best black metal albums of 2018, and yeah, I easily exceeded 25, and then kind of winnowed it down. Um, there were so many coming out so frequently and from so many different countries all around the world, and they were all on YouTube, and they all had something to offer me, and it all kind of peaked for me with a project called, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correct at all, Sapodia. It's not an English word or name, and to be honest, I forgot which country they're natives of. Um, European, somewhere in Europe, um, but they have a track called, translated as "I Really Want to Forget," with lead vocals by Graf von Baphomet from the group Psychonaut 4. Psychonaut 4 is like a depressive black metal group, and they're very intense, and the vocals are extremely intense and shrieking and screaming and really a lot of anguish. And I can't even say angst. That kind of makes it too prosaic sounding to just say angst, because that evokes, kind of mopey faux teen, goth stuff, that isn't really dark and powerful. I mean, angst originally meant fear in German, so so I guess in that sense, it is angst ridden, and anguish, torment, emotional, psychic torment, but not like an edge lord, as that word people use, kind of way. I mean, it was authentic, and I got the feeling um, that these people are presenting honest feelings of despair, uh, but crafting them in such a way that's um, it's not like some just willy nilly, hardcore punk band that just throws a bunch of angry shit together, and that has its charm too. Um, but it's not just the emotions coming out. I mean, they're actually structuring their material. They're actually thinking their material through, and the material that isn't thought through all the way, they're able to improvise on it, almost jazz like. And like if they find a good riff or a good melody, especially great melodies that they'll play super, super fast on the lead guitar with a tremolo picking style, um, that stuff's amazing. It's like majestic, music. I mean, it's incredible. So anyway, a few other kinds of music I listen to a lot that kind of soothe my soul in the last couple of years. Dub reggae. I love reggae in general, and I love roots reggae from the '70s. I think the craftsmanship and the musicianship and the songwriting, especially, of course, are brilliant. I mean, and it was real influenced by American R&B, which I loved from that period also. But I love stuff like that, Jimmy Cliff and Bob Marley and Gregory Isaacs, Toots and the Maytals. All these kind of classic uh, roots reggae cats. Um, but I love the dub stuff the best, the more experimental stuff where they've deconstructed the tracks and it's all about the instruments, and then they layer on the effects, and then it becomes like wide open and spacey. And again, it's almost like I'm describing what the black metal jams. It's like there's a spaciousness. The music has room to breathe, as a drummer in a band of mine once said. And uh, you kind of I can see why people like to get high and listen to dub reggae. And to be honest, I've only listened to dub reggae high maybe once ever. I just never made that a priority, but I probably should at some point in my life. But I get it, because when you're really high, there's that chronal distortion thing. Time just kind of elongates. It's all very elastic, and that's how I feel with some of these longer dub jams. And that rhythm is very soothing to me. I like to listen to it late at night. It's music that definitely it's rhythm, but it's also mood for me. Another kind of music I like a lot on the rock side is krautrock. Quite a lot of the German bands from the late '60s through the maybe mid '80s, but peaking, in the early to mid '70s. Um, I love. I think their approach to rock was it, it it resonates more with me than the American and British kind of stuff that we mainly grew up with. That was dominant. That was given to us commercially through record labels and Rolling Stone magazine and you know music videos and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, we were kind of sold a bill of goods on this stuff, and some of it was great, but classic rock just became septic and uh, void of vitality and creativity. There were a few bands that kept evolving that still had a huge level of success, but very, very few. Uh, I'm having trouble even thinking of one. I mean, Pink Floyd, I guess, is a good example, but they're rare, and it wasn't like it when it began. And in Germany, though, they loved the idiom, but they were coming at it from a totally different angle. They weren't throwing much blues in there, though there are exceptions. Like there's a few female-fronted krautrock groups I love that have a strong R&B influence. Especially love anything by Inga Rumpf. I would recommend you seek her out. She had two bands, Frumpy, and which a play on her name, and Atlantis, and these are both classic 1970s krautrock stuff. It's like prog meets R&B, but just with that uh, just different flavor to it. I listen to her quite often. She has some solo material I like too, but Frumpy and Atlantis have each put out some great albums. But I love the variety of bands. I mean, Can is incredible, and I really like the guitar work on a lot of these groups. It's just really acid guitar kind of sounding. Groups like Cyan and um, the one I really like with Bornemann in it, Eloy. Eloy is just incredible, and these guys again. I mean, they're not playing to a formula. I mean, some of the krautrock bands did evolve into more commercial outfits and et cetera. I mean, like one really good example is the Scorpions. I mean, their first album is unequivocally krautrock. I mean, as far as its style and mood, it has a lot of a strange Germanic take on rock and jazz, kind of mixed in there, and because there's a lot of overlap, a lot of progressive elements in the krautrock music, a lot of experimentation, and a couple of albums down, they were just an amazing heavy metal band, but they were like classic heavy metal. I mean, they were writing more conventional songs for the most part, but sonically they were still pushing it with Uli John Roth on lead guitar into the stratosphere. After he left the group, they became conventional metal band and then eventually a pop band, and they're still together. And it's amazing that Scorpions were actually founded in, if I'm correct, no later than 1966. I believe maybe late 1965 when Rudolf Schenker was, an early teenager. Um, that's amazing. Think about that a minute. 55 years the Scorpions have been a band. So, anyway, uh, so there's a lot of great bands from that thing, and I like to hear that stuff when I'm in more of a rock mood. That's kind of the rock I like to hear a lot. And finally, jazz, and that has tons of other subcategories. I like free jazz, avant-garde jazz. I like bebop and hard bop. Probably my favorite to just put on and listen to. Like cool jazz. I like jazz fusion. Um, it's I guess a good period for me would be like around 1957 to maybe 1969, somewhere in there. 57 to 67 especially, I would say, is like the years of jazz when every year there were dozens of brilliant albums. I mean, and just incredible musicians and all kind of playing with each other. It was a very incestuous scene. And in jazz, the song isn't really what's important, and it's the players. So if you see an album with, it's like these. It's kind of like rock. You have super groups. In jazz, they're always super groups. I mean, if you see an album and go, oh hey, it's got Freddie Hubbard on trumpet and Eric Dolphy on clarinet, and it's got Tony Williams on drums and Bobby Hutcherson on vibes. I mean, and you're like, it's got to be great. And Out to Lunch, it was great. It's classic. I mean, that you could depend on that era of those musicians being endlessly inventive in their improvisations and their compositions. So those are some kinds of music I really love to listen to that devote specific moods. But I have gotten back full circle into some of my old metal and heavy rock kind of stuff. I mean, some groups have always been with me. I mean, Black Sabbath has and always will be, and um, but I have found myself listening more and more again in recent years to Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio or Graham Bonnet on vocals, and early Judas Priest up to about Hellbent for Leather is really my favorite. The first two Iron Maiden albums to me are just perfection. Um, Motorhead, a lot of this stuff I can listen to over and over. Even recently, I even started listening to Metallica again. I was so beyond burnt out on them in every way, musically and just their persona and etc. Um, but recently, I've been exploring Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, and finally, very recently, within the last few weeks, I started listening more heavily to And Justice for All for the first time in years. And these albums really hold up for me. I mean, I'm stunned. That's a trilogy of albums I think are incredible. I mean, Kill 'Em All is a good album. For that kind of album, though, and out of that exact milieu and scene, though, I actually like the first Megadeth album a lot better than Kill 'Em All. That's probably blasphemy to a lot of people, but I actually like the song as Mechanics more than as Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Um, but those three Metallica albums, then they peaked. They hit the prog phase, and they were already starting to chart. And then they hit like the top 10. I think that album hit the top 10 in America, and what a strange album to hit the top 10 in America in 1988 of all years. And then everything changed. It was like Genesis that I mentioned earlier. It was like a totally different band. And I don't know what happened, but the thing is, if you can isolate those eras, I mean, that's why art is recorded, right? That's why music is recorded. That's why art is, you know, put down where everyone can see it and appreciate it forever. And it's going to outlive the artist that created it. And its statement itself, the record of that moment frozen in time, crystallized, all of that talent and brilliance. Uh, that's what it's all about, really. So, on that note, I'm going to, pardon the pun, I'm going to depart. And so that was fun talking to you guys about music, and I'll do it again sometime soon. I'm an unbearable, interminable geek about music too, as I am about film and comics. So, you know, get ready. Enter at your own peril. So, all right, take care.